She serves coffee to a stranger, only to discover he's a billionaire with a life-changing offer. On an ordinary winter morning, she was just another barista serving coffee. But when a mysterious stranger walked into her cafe, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you prefer coffee or hot cocoa on a chilly winter day? And if you love heartwarming stories, don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The snow had fallen steadily all morning, blanketing the small town of Willow Ridge in a layer of white that shimmered under the pale winter sun. The streets were alive with the sound of Christmas carols, laughter, and the jingling of bells. The annual Christmas fair was in full swing, and the town square was dotted with stalls selling everything from handcrafted ornaments to steaming cups of hot cocoa. Lila stood behind the counter of the Willow Ridge Cafe, her hands wrapped around a dish towel as she dried mugs. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her cheeks were flushed, both from the warmth of the cafe and the brisk chill she had felt on her walk to work that morning. Outside, the festival bustled with life, but inside, the cafe offered a cozy reprieve. The windows fogged slightly from the heat of the coffee machines, and the smell of cinnamon rolls and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. "Mama, look at the snowman!" Jamie's voice rang out, his face pressed eagerly to the frosted glass. At 8 years old, he had inherited his mother's wide brown eyes and a sense of wonder that made everything seem magical. He turned to her, grinning. "Do you think we can go to the festival later? I want to see the Tree of Wishes." Lila smiled softly, but her heart sank. She knew what Jamie wanted. He had been talking about the Tree of Wishes for weeks. It was the centerpiece of the festival, a towering fir tree where townsfolk could tie ribbons with their Christmas wishes. But tickets to the festival were expensive this year, and with the rising costs of rent, groceries, and keeping the lights on, it wasn't something Lila could afford. "We'll see, sweetheart," she said gently, ruffling his dark curls. She hated the way his face fell, but she had learned to hide her own disappointment behind a steady, reassuring smile. Jamie was her world, and she would do anything for him. But sometimes, the realities of life made even the smallest dreams feel impossible. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Lila from her thoughts. A man stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat and shaking it from his dark hair. He looked out of place in Willow Ridge. His sharp features and tailored coat spoke of a life spent in cities far removed from the quiet simplicity of this little town. Yet there was something about him that seemed tired, as if he were searching for something he couldn't quite name. "Welcome to Willow Ridge Cafe," Lila said, her tone warm and practiced. "What can I get you?" The man hesitated for a moment, his gray-blue eyes scanning the menu board above the counter before settling on her. "Coffee. Black, please," he said, his voice low and even. Lila nodded and set to work. As the coffee brewed, she glanced at him again. He had taken a seat near the window, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered square outside. There was a weight to him, a quiet loneliness that made Lila wonder what had brought him to a place like this. When she brought the coffee to his table, he looked up, offering a small, polite smile. "Thank you. You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "No," he admitted, wrapping his hands around the mug as if savoring its warmth. "Just passing through." "Well, you've picked a good time to visit," Lila said, gesturing toward the festival outside. "The Christmas fair is the highlight of the year around here." He nodded, but didn't say anything more. Lila hesitated, then decided to leave him to his thoughts. She had learned over the years that some people came to small towns like Willow Ridge to escape. Whatever they were running from, it wasn't her place to ask. Jamie, however, didn't share his mother's restraint. He wandered over to the man's table, his curiosity shining in his wide eyes. "Hi," he said brightly. "Are you going to the festival?" The man looked at Jamie, and for the first time his expression softened. "I don't know," he said. "Are you?" Jamie's face fell slightly, and he glanced back at his mother. "Not this year," he said quietly. "But I want to see the Tree of Wishes. Have you heard about it?" The man shook his head. I haven't. What's that? It's this huge tree in the middle of the square, Jamie explained, his hands gesturing excitedly. Everyone ties ribbons to it with their Christmas wishes. Mama says it's magical. Lila, who had been watching from the counter, stepped in, gently steering Jamie back toward their corner table. Sorry about that, she said, giving the man an apologetic smile. He's very friendly. No need to apologize, the man said, his tone warmer now. It's nice to have someone talk to me like that. It doesn't happen often. Lila tilted her head, sensing there was more to his words than he let on, but before she could reply, the bell above the door jingled again, and a rush of customers filled the cafe. She gave him one last smile before turning back to her work. The man stayed for a while, sipping his coffee and watching the snow fall outside. When he finally stood to leave, he stopped by the counter. Thank you for the coffee, he said, pulling a crisp bill from his wallet and placing it on the counter. Keep the change. Lila glanced at the bill, her eyes widening. It was far more than the coffee had cost, enough to cover a week's worth of groceries. This is too much, she said, trying to hand it back, but the man shook his head. Consider it an early Christmas gift, he said simply, then turned and walked out into the snow. Lila watched him go, the bill still clutched in her hand. There was something about him that lingered, a quiet mystery that she couldn't quite unravel. Jamie tugged at her sleeve, his eyes wide. Mama, do you think he's a prince or something? Lila laughed softly, ruffling his hair. I don't think so, sweetheart, but maybe he's something close. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in a soft, shimmering white. And as Lila watched the stranger disappear into the crowd, she couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were destined to cross again. The days after the snowstorm passed in a flurry of activity at the Willow Ridge Cafe. The Christmas fair brought streams of visitors, and Lila was busier than ever, juggling orders while Jamie stayed entertained with books and crayons in the corner. Yet despite the busyness, she couldn't stop thinking about the man who had visited. There was something about him, his quiet presence, the way he seemed both out of place and oddly at home in their little cafe. She had assumed he was just passing through, like so many visitors, but she was wrong. 3 days after his first visit, the bell above the door jingled, and there he was again. Lila looked up from the counter, her brow arching in surprise as she greeted him. Back again? I thought you were just passing through. He smiled faintly, his breath still visible from the cold outside. I decided to stay a little longer. Coffee black, please. She nodded, and as she worked, she found herself curious. What would make a man like him stay in a town like Willow Ridge? It wasn't exactly a place people came to on a whim, especially someone who carried himself with the air of a man who belonged in boardrooms, not small-town cafes. Still, she didn't pry. When she brought the coffee to his table, Jamie was already there, perched in the chair across from him, his crayons scattered across the table. Lila sighed, about to call Jamie back, but the man waved her off with a small smile. It's fine, he said. He's good company. Jamie looked up at her, beaming. Mama, Marcus says I'm a good artist. He even drew something with me. Marcus, huh? Lila said, her eyes flicking to the man. So that's your name? He chuckled, nodding. I figured it was time for proper introductions. Marcus Albright. Lila Bennett, she replied. And this is Jamie, who clearly has no problem making himself at home. Jamie's great, Marcus said, holding up a small sketch Jamie had drawn of the cafe. He's got an eye for detail. Jamie grinned, puffing out his chest with pride, and Lila couldn't help but smile. She hadn't seen Jamie light up like this in a long time. Ever since her husband Sam had passed 3 years ago, Jamie had been quieter, more reserved. But with Marcus, it was as if a switch had been flipped. He was back to being the curious, chatty boy she had always known. Over the next week, Marcus became a regular fixture at the cafe. He would come in each morning, order his black coffee, and sit by the window. Sometimes he brought a book, other times he just watched the world go by. Jamie had taken to joining him, chatting animatedly about everything from his favorite Christmas movies to the treehouse he wanted to build someday. Lila found herself looking forward to Marcus's visits more than she cared to admit. There was something calming about his presence, something steady. He listened when Jamie talked, really listened, and he treated Lila with a quiet respect that was rare. She had no idea who he really was, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel quite so alone. One snowy afternoon, as the cafe slowed down, Marcus stayed later than usual. Jamie had fallen asleep in the corner, his head resting on a pile of books, and Lila was wiping down the tables when Marcus spoke. "He told me about the festival," Marcus said, his tone casual but probing. "The Tree of Wishes." Lila froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "Yes, he's been talking about it for weeks." "Why don't you take him?" Marcus asked. She hesitated, not meeting his gaze. "It's expensive this year," she admitted quietly. "Between work and bills, it's just not something I can manage." Marcus didn't reply right away, but his expression softened. "He seems like a great kid, smart, kind. You've done a wonderful job raising him." Lila looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but he's my whole world." Marcus nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "I never had kids," he said quietly. "Never married. My life's been different." Lila tilted her head, sensing there was more to his story. "Different how?" He gave her a small, almost rueful smile. "I've spent most of my life building things. Companies, mostly. I've done well for myself, but it doesn't leave much room for anything else. And sometimes I wonder if I got it all wrong." Lila didn't know what to say to that. There was a vulnerability in his voice, a quiet regret that tugged at something deep inside her. "It's never too late," she said softly. "To build something real, I mean." Their eyes met for a moment, and Lila felt a strange warmth, as if they had reached an unspoken understanding. But before she could say more, Jamie stirred in the corner, mumbling sleepily as he rubbed his eyes. "Marcus," he said, his voice groggy but excited. "Will you come to the festival with us, if we go?" Lila opened her mouth to interject, but Marcus beat her to it. "I'd love to, Jamie," he said, his smile warm and genuine, "if your mom says it's okay." Jamie turned to Lila, his eyes wide with hope. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. But then Marcus stood, pulling on his coat and leaving a few crisp bills on the table. "Think about it," he said, his voice soft. "Good night, Jamie. Good night, Lila." He left before Lila could respond, disappearing into the snowy evening. She stared at the door long after he was gone, her thoughts swirling. There was more to Marcus than he let on, she was sure of it now. But what exactly was he hiding? That night, as she tucked Jamie into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama, do you think Marcus is magic?" Lila laughed softly, brushing his curls away from his forehead. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" "Because he always makes me feel happy," Jamie said simply. "Like you do." Lila kissed his forehead, her heart full and heavy all at once. "Get some sleep, Jamie." As she sat by the window that night, watching the snow fall, Lila couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. Who was this man who had wandered into their lives? And why did it feel like, for the first time in years, things were starting to change? The sound of children's laughter and the hum of holiday music filled the air as the Willow Ridge Christmas Festival sparkled with life. Twinkling lights draped over every stall, casting a warm glow against the snowy backdrop. The Tree of Wishes stood tall and majestic in the town square, its branches adorned with colorful ribbons that fluttered gently in the evening breeze. Each ribbon represented someone's dream, tied to the hope of the season. But Lila wasn't at the festival. Instead, she was in the cafe, wiping down tables, while Jamie doodled in his notebook. It was Christmas Eve, and although the festival was just a short walk away, it might as well have been in another world. Lila had tried to distract Jamie with movies and books, but she could tell he was disappointed. He hadn't mentioned the festival all day, but his silence spoke volumes. The bell above the door jingled, and Lila turned to see Marcus stepping inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. He smiled at her, then glanced at Jamie, who was hunched over his notebook. "Busy tonight?" Marcus asked, his voice light but curious. Lila shook her head. "Not really. Most people are at the festival." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. He glanced toward Jamie, who hadn't looked up from his drawings. He's not going? Lila sighed, lowering her voice. I couldn't make it work this year. It's fine, he understands. Marcus didn't respond right away. He walked over to Jamie's table, crouching down to meet his eye level. Hey buddy, he said gently. What are you drawing? Jamie looked up, his face lighting up when he saw Marcus. The Tree of Wishes, he said, holding up his sketch. It was a child's version of the iconic tree, its branches overflowing with ribbons. I was thinking about what I'd wish for if I could go. Marcus tilted his head, studying the drawing. What would you wish for? Jamie hesitated, then leaned closer, as if sharing a secret. I'd wish for Mama to smile more, like she used to. Lila froze, her heart twisting at Jamie's innocent words. She turned away, pretending to tidy the counter, but she felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. That's a good wish, Marcus said softly, his voice steady. And you know what? I think wishes like that are worth fighting for. Jamie nodded solemnly, and Marcus stood, walking back to Lila at the counter. You should take him, he said quietly. Marcus, Lila began, but he held up a hand. Please, he said, his tone firm but kind, let me help. Before she could protest, he pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the counter. Consider it a gift, he said, meeting her eyes, from one friend to another. Lila hesitated, her pride warring with her gratitude, but when she opened the envelope and saw the festival tickets inside, she knew there was no arguing. She looked up at Marcus, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Just say yes, Marcus said, smiling. Lila nodded, unable to hold back her tears. Thank you. An hour later, Lila and Jamie walked hand in hand through the festival gates, their breath visible in the crisp night air. Jamie's eyes were wide with wonder as he took in the sights. The carousel spinning with golden lights, the stalls filled with holiday treats, the laughter and music that seemed to echo through the square. Look, Mama, Jamie said, tugging at her hand and pointing toward the Tree of Wishes. It's even bigger than I imagined. The tree was breathtaking, its branches stretching high into the sky, each one covered in ribbons of every color. People milled around it, tying their wishes and gazing up at its splendor. Jamie ran ahead, his excitement contagious, and Lila followed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. When they reached the tree, Jamie turned to her, holding out a ribbon. Can I write my wish now? Lila nodded, kneeling beside him as he carefully wrote on the ribbon with a marker. She didn't ask what he wrote, she wanted it to be his secret, his moment. When he was done, she lifted him so he could tie the ribbon to one of the lower branches. He stepped back, gazing at the tree with a look of pure joy. Do you want to make a wish, Mama? Jamie asked, holding out another ribbon. Lila hesitated, her gaze drifting to the tree. She hadn't made a wish in years. Life had a way of hardening people, of making them believe that dreams and magic were for children. But as she looked at Jamie's expectant face, she realized that maybe it was time to believe again. She took the ribbon, writing her wish with careful strokes. Then, standing on tiptoe, she tied it to a branch. For a moment, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, wishes could come true. Mama, look, Jamie said suddenly, pointing toward the carousel. It's Marcus! Lila turned, and sure enough, there was Marcus, leaning casually against a railing as he watched the festival. She wasn't surprised to see him. Something about tonight felt like his doing. She walked over, Jamie skipping ahead, and smiled at him. Didn't expect to see you here, she said, her tone light. Marcus chuckled. I thought I'd check it out. It's a nice festival. It is, Lila agreed, glancing around. Thank you, for the tickets, for everything. You don't have to thank me, Marcus said, his gaze soft. Seeing you two happy is enough. Jamie tugged at Marcus's sleeve. Did you make a wish, too? Marcus hesitated, then smiled. Not yet, but maybe I will. Jamie grinned, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the tree. Come on, you have to. Lila watched as Jamie led Marcus to the tree, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. And as she stood there, the lights of the festival twinkling around her, she realized that maybe Marcus had become more than just a stranger passing through. Maybe he was something, someone, she hadn't realized she needed. The festival lights shimmered against the snowfall, casting a warm golden glow over the town square. The tree of wishes stood tall, its ribbons swaying in the gentle breeze, each one carrying a hope, a dream, a silent prayer. Lila watched as Jamie eagerly led Marcus toward the tree, the little boy's laughter ringing through the crisp winter air. "Here," Jamie said, pressing a blank ribbon into Marcus's hand. "You have to make a wish." Marcus hesitated, staring at the ribbon between his fingers. He wasn't the kind of man who made wishes. His life had been built on action, on control, on making things happen, not on hoping for miracles. Yet, standing here in the small town that had embraced him without knowing who he really was, something inside him softened. Jamie handed him a marker. "You have to write it down," he insisted, his eyes shining with excitement. Lila watched with quiet amusement as Marcus sighed in mock defeat. All right," he said, shaking his head playfully before uncapping the marker. He leaned over the small wooden table beside the tree and after a moment's thought, began writing. Lila was tempted to peek, but she respected the tradition. Wishes were meant to be personal. Jamie bounced on his toes as Marcus tied the ribbon to a low-hanging branch. "Now it's official," the boy declared. Marcus smirked. "Good to know." They stood there for a while, watching as more families approached the tree, tying their own ribbons, whispering their own wishes. Lila stole a glance at Marcus. His expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Jamie yawned suddenly, rubbing his eyes. "Mama, I'm sleepy." Lila checked her watch. It was late. The festival would be winding down soon. "All right, sweetheart, let's get you home." As they turned to leave, Marcus walked with them, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. The air between him and Lila felt charged, unspoken words hanging in the space between them. When they reached the cafe, Marcus hesitated outside. "You should get him inside. It's getting colder." Lila nodded, adjusting Jamie in her arms. The boy had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his small breaths warm against her sweater. Marcus shifted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how. Finally, Lila broke the silence. "Would you like to come in for a bit? I can make some tea." Marcus hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." She unlocked the door and led him inside. The cafe was quiet, the warmth inside a welcome contrast to the cold outside. Lila carefully laid Jamie on the cushioned bench in the corner, tucking a blanket around him before moving to the counter to make tea. Marcus took a seat at one of the tables, watching her work. "You run this place all by yourself?" She nodded. "Ever since my parents retired, it's been tough, but it's home." Marcus traced a finger over the wood grain of the table. "I can see why you love it here." She glanced at him. "What about you? Where do you call home?" He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "I used to think home was wherever my work took me. New York, London, Paris. I've built companies, traveled the world, made more money than I'll ever need, but none of it ever felt like home." Lila frowned slightly, pouring hot water over the tea leaves. "That sounds lonely." Marcus let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "It is." He ran a hand through his hair. "That's why I came here. I just needed to disappear for a while, to figure out what comes next." Lila placed a mug of tea in front of him, then sat across from him, her own hands wrapped around her cup. "And? Have you figured it out?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I think I have." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way her heart had started beating a little faster. Marcus reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. Lila frowned, hesitant. "What is this?" "Open it." She carefully tore open the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her eyes scanned the words, her breath catching as she realized what she was looking at. It was a business proposal, but not just any proposal, one for the Willow Ridge Cafe. Lila looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, what is this?" He leaned forward, his expression serious but hopeful. "I want to invest in your cafe. Not to take it over, just to help, to expand it, renovate it, maybe even open a second location. You've built something special here, Lila, something worth growing." Lila's hands trembled slightly as she set the paper down. Why would you do this? Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady. Because I believe in it, and I believe in you. She stared at him, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said, his lips curling into a small smile. Lila exhaled, emotions swirling inside her. This man, this stranger who had walked into her life so unexpectedly, was offering her something she never thought possible. A future. Security. A chance to build something lasting. But it wasn't just the business proposal that made her heart ache. It was him. The way he had quietly become a part of her and Jamie's life. The way he listened, the way he cared. Marcus, she said softly, I don't need your money. He looked momentarily startled, but she reached for his hand before he could speak. I don't want you to think that's why I care about you. His fingers tightened around hers. I know. That's why I'm here. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was full of understanding. Finally, Lila nodded, a slow smile spreading across her lips. Okay, she whispered. Yes. Marcus exhaled, relief and something deeper flashing in his eyes. Good. They sat there for a long time, hands intertwined, the warmth of the cafe wrapping around them like a promise. Jamie stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about Christmas wishes. Marcus glanced toward him, then back at Lila. What did you wish for? Lila smiled, squeezing his hand. I wished for something real. Marcus lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Looks like we both got our wish. And as the snow continued to fall outside, Lila knew that for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Because sometimes the best gifts weren't wrapped in paper or tied with ribbons. Sometimes they were the people who walked into your life and made it whole again. If you like this story, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you enjoy stories that embraces your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Let me know in the comments what stood out to you the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.